Okay, let's get started with a quick word of prayer. Let us pray. O God, the King eternal, who dividest the day from the darkness and turnest the shadow of death into the morning, drive far off from us all wrong desires. Incline our hearts to keep thy law, and guide our feet into the way of peace, that having done thy will with cheerfulness while it was day, we may, when the night cometh, rejoice to give thee thanks. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Right, so before we begin with our formal lesson on Matthew 2, matter of fact, actually, we probably need to pass out some Bibles. I apologize for that. Passing these around, I very much appreciate it.
Hey,
Hey, well,
how's everybody doing?
oh, fine, thank you. So before we begin with our formal lesson, good morning. I want to know if anybody had any questions for this week. Any questions from lectionary readings this week? Any questions from anything at all? I'd be happy to answer. We haven't done that in a little while, and I wanted to make sure that we kept up that good tradition. Anything in the lectionary that bugged you or thought was odd, always feel free to bring those questions in. Let me know, hey, what the heck is going on here? What does this mean? But they're always welcome to bring those in. I like to say, you know you're in a cult when you can't ask questions. That's always bad. Christianity is not like that at all. You can always ask questions. Questions are great. I love questions. So if you don't have any this week, don't worry. But if you have one, I'll give you 10 seconds if you'd like to answer one. Question, please.
Is today, this evening is 12th night, right?
It is, yes.
Okay.
So
12th night goes from night to night, right?
right. So,
Okay.
well,
Sort of.
if you want to go night to night, it'd be from
It's tonight.
yesterday to tonight, right? Or yesterday night to tonight, right? That makes
Okay.
sense.
Isn't the 6th?
Because the 6th is Epiphany, right?
Tomorrow,
So tonight will be the first even song for Epiphany.
Okay.
And then tomorrow we'll have morning prayer for Epiphany, evening prayer for Epiphany, and Holy Communion for Epiphany. So that's the way you want to kind of think about it that way.
Okay.
You kind of work it through there. So tonight all the propers are for Epiphany.
Okay.
You can kind of see this if you look in the front of the prayer book. It's got the listings of this, and you kind of see where the dates come around. But anyway, good question. Any others?
So
All
we'll
right.
have a noon service tomorrow.
Noon service tomorrow, God willing, yes. Noon service tomorrow, God willing. So morning prayer and at 7:30, Holy Eucharist at 12, and then evening prayer at 6. God willing. All right, so let's get started with today's lesson in Matthew 2. Of course, this is from our lectionary this week, but also makes sense since we are getting ready to celebrate the Epiphany. Christmas, too, the prophets for today are kind of pushing us in this direction, kind of getting us ready for the Epiphany and the manifestation of Christ to the Gentiles. What's interesting about this, of course, is that a lot of people, when they talk about sort of the categories of the Gospels, they tend to talk about Matthew as kind of being the Gospel for the Jewish people. Sometimes people will say that, or for people who come from the Jewish tradition, right? I mean, it makes a big point, for instance, in its opening genealogy, to argue for the Davidic connection between Jesus and David himself, right? So Jesus is in the Davidic line. David is the center of this genealogy, and it kind of circles around him, right, as being the most important part of it that leads into Jesus. So it's interesting that when we have this manifestation to the Gentiles is most fully given to us, of course, in Matthew's Gospel. Right? We have this interesting picture of the Gentiles coming to worship the new Davidic king. That makes sense in our minds if we think of the fact that so much of what is promised in the book of Isaiah, promised in the Psalms, is that the kings of the earth would come and fall down before the true king of the earth, the Messiah. Matthew wants to make it come perfectly clear in our minds that that is what's happening here. That the prophecies, as we'll go through, a lot of them, he's constantly mentioning prophecies that are happening, right? He's constantly using as his as the basis for our understanding of what's going on, the prophecies of the Old Testament. So when we think about, I want to know what's happening here, that's where he goes. And that's what he's using to kind of illuminate our eyes of what's happening. So let's start off with verse 1 of chapter 2 of Matthew's Gospel. And there's coffee too if you'd like some. I made it, so please don't blame Linda for my failures. Verse 2, chapter 2, verse 1. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem. Now, a couple things about the introduction, of course. I have here my picture of Herod the Great. There are multiple Herods. There's Herod the Great, who was made king of the Jews by Julius Caesar. Weirdly, he backed the wrong side in later on in the war between him and Caesar Augustus, between Caesar Augustus and Mark Antony, the whole thing. But he's still able to be king of the Jews. He's kind of a wheeler and a dealer. He's an Idumean, so he's not actually an ethnic Jew. So he's always trying to do things to kind of make the ethnic Jews and religious Jews in which he's ruling over happy. So I believe it was Caesar Augustus who famously said, I would rather be Herod's pig than his son. In Greek, it's kind of a play on words. Why? Well, because Herod wouldn't kill a pig because that would break the dietary laws, but he would kill his son, as he did a number of times. He was not a good guy. Now, there's another Herod, Herod the Tetrarch, one of his sons. When Herod dies, basically his kingdom is broken up into 4 parts. Archelaus is also mentioned it too, but his other, Herod the Tetrarch, is his son. Herod dies about 4 BC in the Gregorian calendar. Dies about 4 BC. Some of this is because moving over from Julian and Gregorian, it kind of throws things off. This means that Christ was going by our imperfect calendar. And Christ was born more something like 6 or 5 BC. So basically we kind of calculate, we know based on this calendar that Herod died about 4 BC. We know that 2 years, 1 year, 2 years earlier, Jesus is born, because that's when we know that the slaughter of the innocents happened. So we kind of, we normally think of, AD 1 as when, of course, Christ is born. There's no 0 AD, right? So AD 1. That's the year Christ is born, but because of human errors and calculations and things, it ends up being something more like 6 or 5 BC. Herod dies in 4 BC. And that's kind of where things are taking on here. So, it gets complicated, like when exactly is the exact year Jesus died. Again, this is a thing that happened in public, but nobody was using this calendar then, right? There's kind of a joke. There was a joke in the New Yorker where there was a Roman with his checkbook, and he says, gosh, I keep writing BC when it's AD. Well, no, nobody was doing that then, right? It isn't until later that Anno BC, before Christ, and Anno Domino, which means when he walked the earth, the year of the Lord, right? Year of the Lord. That's when we start using this calendar. So again, everything was happening. They had a calendar, they just weren't using the one we use, right? It would be kind of strange for them to do that. We're going to base our calendar off the birth of a Jewish carpenter. That might happen someday, right? No, that's not how anything works. You can still see vestiges of some of this in the calendars we use today, right? But it's January, February, March, April, May. You've got months named after Jew, right? Juno, months named after Zeus, right? So there's still weird places in which sort of calendar things kind of all mix together and keep moving through, and just common usage happens, right? But anyway, that's a whole different story. Calendars in Christianity can be a real hairy deal. Even things like, when is Easter supposed to be, right? So we have our Greek Orthodox brethren who have Easter pretty much a week after we do. Things get funny with the Julian and Gregorian calendar controversy.
Jesus was maybe between 32 and 35.
Sure. Well, and people like could have been the exact age of Jesus is always one of those funny things. It doesn't really matter tremendously at all, and it's not really a thing. But sticking with between 30, 35, could be, probably, something around that age. Doesn't change much of anything, exactly how old he was. Again, birthdays weren't that big a deal at this time, right? People didn't like have big celebrations for their birthdays. That's can be a really frustrating thing about looking in the past and trying to figure out when people were born. Anybody, right? Because it's like, sometimes they're like question mark and we know when they died, right? Yeah, because unless you become famous, nobody really cared about when you were born. But they really only cared about when you this is an important person, this is when they died, right? It's kind of funny how that works out. Right? When was Peter born? I don't know. When was John born? We know when they died, but it's kind of an idea. Anyway, this is true of all sorts of people from the past. All right. So a couple of the things there. We have Herod we talked about. Now the Magi, the wise men. These were almost certainly priests or court advisors from these great, probably from Babylon, but from the great kingdoms of the East. What's interesting about this, of course, is that we have our great hymn, we three kings of Orient are. And in all of our beautiful nativity sets, they have all crowns and stuff on. Remember, our nativity sets are representational. This isn't like a snapshot of what happened at this time period, right? Like the shepherds wouldn't have been with the wise men, right? Because the wise men come like a year later, right? So we celebrate that. We constrict that into 12 days, but that would have been a long period of time, right? Because this is all representational. But again, if these are representatives of the kings of the East, then they are, in effect, the kings have come, right? If you send your representatives, that's the thing that matters, right? But again, if you were going to write a hymn, something like, "We three representatives of the king," that doesn't really flow nearly as well as "We three kings of Orient are." You get a much better sense of that, right? And were there three of them? We don't know. There are three gifts, so we kind of assume that you're going to have three people,
it's
right?
a birthday party thing.
It's a birthday party. Like, someone's got to bring a gift, right? I would think so, right? But no, we don't know if there are three of them. But that's okay. And again, our nativity scene is representative. It's one of those funny things where sometimes you would talk to really, really, really annoying, I hate to even use this term, but really kind of sort of people who are against all images, right? And they're like, "Well, I hate nativity scenes because that's not really how it happened." Like, thanks. Everyone has known that since St. Francis put this thing together, right? We know that's not a snapshot of the ancient world, but it's a way for us to see the beauty of both the Holy Family, the beauty of the shepherds representing Israel, and the beauty of the Magi representing the Gentiles all coming together, right? That you could say that, or you could have a beautiful image of that or statue of that in your church. And you instantly get that. Even if you can't read, you get it seeing it, right? Taught to you. And it's a thing that you can hold with you for the rest of your life. Right? So again, it's a dumb thing, argument people get into sometimes, but please don't get rid of your nativity sets because somebody's a killjoy. Please. It's a really good representation of this truth that we find in Matthew 2. And we're going to unpack all of it in here too as we go through. Any questions on that? Question?
The star wouldn't have come out until Jesus was born. So if they were in the East, they're going to travel that distance.
Right. And Matthew tells us this, right? I mean, because they're not still in the stable when the Magi show up, right? When exactly the star appears, what is the star? Is it a supernova? Is it a completely supernatural event? None of that is super important. I mean, sometimes we read fascinating accounts from the Middle Ages and even further on of people trying to figure out when exactly the star was. And there are really fascinating events that occurred in that time that people have said, well, that's probably what the star was. Sometimes idiots say this to say, like, well, it wasn't supernatural. It was a natural thing that happened. But if out of the entire cosmos, God makes a star appear that points in the direction of house, even if that happened naturally, you would go, my goodness, the Lord of heaven and earth, the Lord of nature has shown me this thing, right? You wouldn't go, science has figured out something, then we get rid of God. Like, that's a really dumb way to think about this. The same thing with like when people say the Red Sea sometimes parts. Like, again, if you're being chased by Pharaoh and his soldiers and the Red Sea suddenly parts, that's a natural event. You go, thank God I've gotten through the Red Sea and I'm not going to be killed. Right? I mean, it's a silly argument people make, but again, we're apparently knocking out silly arguments today as our goal. But don't let that hurt your ideas.
Can I make one more comment
Please.
about the star?
Please do.
I think it's maybe interesting, or at least to me it is important to think that even what we consider to be inanimate objects obey God.
Exactly right.
The
Exactly.
star was there because he put it there,
Right.
and it didn't move
Right.
until it wasn't needed anymore. So if a star can obey, or the sea can obey,
Yes.
Right.
I think it sends a sends a very important message to
Yes.
us.
Yes. Yeah. That's like as Jesus says to the Pharisees when they tell him to make the children shut up about saying he's the Messiah. He says, well, if they stop, the stones themselves would speak out. Right? Absolutely. Yeah. No. God is God of everything. He's God of matter. He's God of the things He creates. Right? Us too. Right? Which is a beautiful part of it as well. But yeah, inanimate objects are, of course, the things that He has control over, and speak to Him of who He is, right? Oh, absolutely. This is again a really good argument for using beautiful things in our churches to tell us about God. I think that's absolutely the case, but that's a whole different argument we can get with Presbyterians later. Very good though. All right. Now, a thing about the star we do want to say here. Why is the star important in terms of the picture Matthew's trying to paint for us of what's going on? Is because, of course, the star is in reference to Numbers 24:17. Again, this is one of those problems. Again, whenever we run into a quotation from Numbers, it is a precious few number of the saints who have done the due diligence of reading through Numbers. So I will read you this prophecy, of course. It alludes to the star of Jacob, and we hear in Numbers 27, I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. Shall crush the forehead of Moab, and break down all the sons of Shem. So we have this image of this, again, when people call this a royal star, that's not just a thing that comes out of the thin air. It is that in the prophecy that we find in Numbers, written by Moses, 2,000 years before this is all happening, right? We find that there is a promise that this star will show you where the scepter will rise up. And what, of course, is a scepter used for? A scepter is a symbol of royal power. Anyone who's ever seen an enthronement, right? My wife and I quite like that show, The Crown. They do the whole coronation of Elizabeth the Second, and she's given what? She's given a scepter as a sign of her royal authority. This is the prophecy that Herod asks for. You see here, he's going to ask the religious scholars, what is this all about? And part of it they're going to say is this part here. And this is why Herod gets upset. He's fought tooth and claw, murdered his own family so that he can be king. And suddenly this prophecy comes out about this boy who's done nothing, who's going to take his throne. That's it. And we'll see what he does here in short point. So verse 3. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And assembling all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. What's interesting here, too, just kind of give you a sense of what Matthew also is wanting us to see, is there shouldn't be more than one chief priest. Right? What's happening is you have sort of this, you see this in Annas and Caiaphas, they kind of keep going back and forth between this. Well, Josephus, the Jewish historian, tells us that at this point the Romans were basically picking who would be chief priest based on who they could kind of manipulate and control. And so what you almost certainly have here is people who've had the job who've been kind of deposed. And so Matthew kind of puts them all together, right, as a way of kind of describing this. Things are already in turmoil in the land of the Jews. And into that world is coming the king. He inquired of them where the Christ was born, and they told him, in Bethlehem, Judea, for so it is written by the prophet. And you, O Bethlehem, the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. So, of course, this is from Micah 5:2. in Micah, we have this prophecy that the Messiah will come out of Bethlehem. And he's described as a king in Numbers 24:17. In Micah, he's described as a shepherd. So we see again that the titles that Jesus claimed for himself are all titles that are already in his word in the Old Testament describing him. So when he calls himself the Good Shepherd, that isn't just him being kind of trying to find a sweet metaphor for how he takes care of our lives. This is a part of his messianic title of who he is, right? That he has come to shepherd his people. All that, of course, has to go through Bethlehem, which, of course, the city of bread, but the city of David. Right? Again, showing, as Matthew is very clear to show us in the genealogy, that the kingship of Christ goes through David, that he is the rightful king of Israel, come to sit on the throne forever. The only one able to do that. Verse 7. Then Herod summoned the wise men secretly and ascertained from them what time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word, that I too may come and worship him. What's interesting here is that the chief priests and the scribes don't go. It's an interesting thing. It's also interesting that Herod doesn't go himself. It's entirely possible that he didn't totally believe that this is all happening. Right? Herod was also quite ill at this point in his life. He's going to be dead here very soon. He's going to be dead within a year. And that's probably why, but he thinks he has these agents he can send out and order around. But of course, what the beautiful image of this is the powerlessness of Herod. Right? Herod thinks he can order people around and tell them what to do, and they'll just do it. But there's come a king more powerful than him who actually is going to tell these magi what to do. We're seeing the impotence of Herod, right? And that was a hell of a thing to write when Matthew wrote this, right? Talking about the official representative of the Roman Empire as being impotent and not even able to organize a search party for arrival is a pretty provocative thing to write. There's a lot of treason in here, which we have to kind of see too. A lot of this book is a death warrant. Matthew, of course, is putting on himself. There's also a death warrant to have it, right? That's one reason early Christians, bishops were tortured to get their copies of the Gospels. Right? And many of them went to their death because they wouldn't give them up. So, keep going. Verse 9, after listening to the king, they went on their way, and behold, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them, until they came to rest over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. Again, Matthew, the irony of this he's trying to put on is you have these dirty Gentiles, described in the Old Testament as dogs, described as not good, right? It's these dirty Gentiles who understand the momentous nature of what is happening, and not the chief priests and the scribes. That is very provocative, right? But it's not any different than what Jesus will say, for instance, when the centurion comes up to him, right, and says, I have not found greater faith than in this man, a Gentile, a soldier of the oppressors. Right? God's ways are not our ways. Again, what we see again and again in the story. Right? The people we expect to be the people who will react the way we expect them to react are never the way it actually happens. Right? We see intimately again and again and again that our expectations are upturned and changed by the God who doesn't care about our expectations, nor the expectations of the original audience. Right? It's an amazing thing to catch again and again. And this whole scene is this vivid description of just that fact. Right? All right. Verse 11. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and worshipped him. Then opened it. Well, look, that's an interesting point too for Matthew. Remember, Matthew's original audience has majority of they would not see themselves as former Jews. They would see themselves as living in the fulfillment of the Jewish promise, right? And the idea that someone would fall down and worship a man is not good. That's not what you do. You do not worship babies. You do not worship people, right? The only person you can worship is God. Right? And Matthew is trying to get us a sense that these magi, by the power of God, are getting it in a way that others aren't. Again. But it's also when people say, well, the early church didn't believe Jesus was God. Matthew wouldn't write this if he didn't think that. Right? He wouldn't say this little child was worthy of worship if he didn't also believe that this child was God. It's a small thing easily to miss, and the progressives and the revisionists hopefully miss that, so they can try to convince us that Matthew doesn't think Jesus is God. But it's all over the place, and this is just a great example of it right there. And what do? They open their treasures. They offered him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. Now, interesting there, the gifts, right? I mean, we have in the Psalms, like Psalm 72 is a great example of this, of people coming and giving, of the Gentiles giving their treasures to the Messiah, to the King. But also, of course, it's in Isaiah 60, where we have this image of the kings of the Gentiles bringing gold and frankincense. What's interesting is it doesn't mention myrrh. Why would that be? But I think what we see here is the gradual revelation of what's coming. The myrrh is a symbol, of course. Myrrh is like ointment, right? It's almost like a perfume, right? But it's one of the things you put on dead bodies, of course. We have an image here of this king being given gold and frankincense, these sort of kingly gifts, but also, of course, this foreshadowing of what is to come. Right? This foreshadowing of Mary is holding him, right? And she'll be one of the women who goes to his tomb after he's been murdered to put myrrh on his dead body. One of the things the ladies come back the day of his resurrection, what are they carrying? They're carrying the ointment to put in his body. And they get there and the angel says, he won't need it. Right? He's not here now. Matthew's already getting us ready for that. But it's not just Matthew, of course. It's already happening in the narrative God is weaving together in Matthew, right? in this gospel. Right? That's already happening all around us in this story. It's a fascinating thing happening. God is a grand storyteller, and it's happening already, both in the fulfillment of prophecies, but also in showing us a picture of what's coming further within here. Okay. Verse 12, and being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. So again, God, the real king of the earth, the real king of the Jews, not Herod, is the one who tells the wise men where to go. Right? So the order of Herod is superseded by someone infinitely higher than he. Herod is king of nothing. So verse 13, the flight to Egypt. Now when they had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, Rise, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you. For Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him. So remember, earlier in Matthew's gospel, Joseph in a dream is told not to break the betrothal with Mary, that her child is not from fornication, but from the action of the Holy Spirit upon her. This is the Holy Child, the Son of God. And again, Joseph now is being told in a dream, protect that child. You got to go to Egypt. You got to get out. Verse 14. And he rose and took the child and his mother by night and departed to Egypt, and there remained until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet. Out of Egypt I called my son. Now that, of the Lord out of Egypt I called my son, that's a reference back to Hosea 11:1. Hosea 11:1. And it refers, in that passage, it's actually a callback. Let's see if I have it here so I can read it for you. It's actually a callback to the first Exodus. So it says in Hosea 11:1, "When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son." So what's that a reference to?
Moses.
The first Exodus, right? So out of Egypt I called my son, right? What is fascinating about Matthew quoting that here? What is Matthew in fact saying? What Matthew's saying is that he wants us to see the connection between the first Exodus of the Israelites out of Egypt by God and what's happening on the pages of this gospel right now. He wants us to see the connection between Israel here described as a son. Moses says the same thing to Pharaoh, that Israel is the son of God. Right? He wants us to see the connection between Jesus as the fulfillment of who Israel is, and the one who's going to bring about the second Exodus, the great Exodus, the Exodus that the first Exodus was pointing us towards, the Exodus from death to life. That's what he wants us to see with that little quotation, right? It's fascinating. There's a lot going on there. He wants us to be already seeing Jesus as the son that Israel is to be. Again, we see this transition also in Isaiah's prophecies, where we go from having kind of this general description of Israel, to sort of we have this suffering servant, this individual who's taking on these burden of being the fulfillment of who Israel is meant to be. Question?
Yeah, the first Joseph was the interpreter of dreams, and then God sends this Joseph, the new Joseph, dreams to warn him.
That's an interesting point. I've never really thought of the connection. It's certainly something God might be wanting us to see. I'll have to think about that some more. Yeah, that's really interesting. It is interesting to see how God, though, works in these cases. I've always found it fascinating the difference between the Annunciation to Mary, where the angel shows up and tells her what's all about to happen, and the way in which he talks to Joseph through dreams. The angel talks to him. I don't know exactly why God chooses to talk the way he does. He has his reasons, but it's an interesting kind of difference in the way in which these things occur. But yeah, the connection between Joseph—that's an interesting one. I'll have to think about that more. Thank for bringing that up.
Maybe he does it through dreams because he doesn't want to bring the focus on Jesus until he's ready to take up his.
I mean, at this point, Jesus is a real baby.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
You're exactly right. I mean, it isn't as if Jesus can be calling the shots here. And Joseph has been tasked with protecting the Son of God. A son that's not his own, but is the salvation of the whole world. It's a fascinating relationship it'd be amazing to have more of it. But again, the focus of the book is not the relationship between Joseph and Jesus. It's on Jesus saving the earth, and you only have so much space. But yeah, I think Joseph is he's the head of the family as well, right? So he's the one who's within the Jewish culture and within the culture of the New Testament who's tasked with protecting the family. Question.
I had a thing about the Magi bringing gold.
Yeah.
It's kind of like traveling money. I mean, because how would a carpenter, have the money, resources to get all the way to Egypt, set up shop?
That certainly would have been helpful, I imagine.
Yeah.
I hadn't really thought about that too. That's a good point. Yeah, certainly. If you got to do international, no travelers checks in the ancient world. And carpenters, certainly not rolling in the dough. I mean, a good trade, but again, not a big vacation to Egypt or a refugee trip to Egypt. Nothing good there going on. Yeah, it's good to have some money to pass around. Yeah, it's a good point. I never thought about that. I love that. God provides, right?
He does. Yeah.
Sometimes Magi show up and give you gold. I think a lot of us would like the Magi to show up and give us gold.
Get out of town.
Yeah.
I think I'd rather skip the Magi if I have to flee from
Flee to Egypt,
Yeah.
It's exactly. I think that's probably right, but As Jesus says, the Son of Man has no place to put his head down. When he warns people before they start following him. Again, Jesus not the most seeker-sensitive religious movement starting out there. Like, go ahead and follow me, but we probably won't have any place to stay ever. Oh, I don't know about that, Jesus. I think I might sit this one out. That's what a lot of people say. But, all right, but let's go to verse 16. Then Herod, when he saw that he was tricked by the wise men, became furious. And he sent and killed all the male children in Bethlehem, and in all the region who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had ascertained from the wise men. So, it's difficult to know the exact number of children killed in this event. Probably less than 500, probably in that realm, because remember, it's just children born between the ages of 1 and 2. And it is a horrible, evil, terrible event, one that the church recognizes every year with the Feast of the Holy Innocents, 3 days after Christmas. Right? Always shocking to me that we just have this big festival celebrating the Incarnation, joy and happy Christmas songs, and then 3 days later we're remembering the infants who died as the evil world tried to kill God as a baby. It's a horrifying picture, but again, it's a picture of Herod's impotence. It's a picture of his inability, even with all this evil, to do what he wants. He's not really all powerful at all. He's not powerful really at all. And if we recognize that it is Christ's mission to end death and empower the weak and the forsaken to be righteous and full of life, then it's later on when we see Christ rise from his tomb that we can retroactively think back to this event and understand that, as horrible as it was, Herod doesn't get to win. Right? Just as the crowd who murdered Jesus doesn't get to win, just as evil doesn't get to win, none of it gets to win if death is defeated by the merciful Lord Christ. So as much pain and death as Herod thinks he can inflict on people, it will never be enough to defeat the love of God. But it does not mean people aren't going to die when evil attacks Christ, whether directly or through the people around him, the people in him and with him, Christians, of course. Right? And we get this haunting reference in verse 17. That was fulfilled what was spoken by the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be comforted because they are no more. Now what's interesting about that quotation, a lot of interesting things there, is that we have to wrestle with the idea that the death of these children and the horror of Herod is rolled into the fulfillment of the divine plan. Got to wrestle with that. Again, our trust and faith is in the God who destroys death in love, but that's a thing that's happening here. But it also is meant to drive us to better understand what's happening in Jeremiah 31. It drives us back to that prophecy. And so again, it's 31:15. Jeremiah is talking about the exile. Right? He's talking about when Jerusalem is destroyed by the Babylonians. King Nebuchadnezzar tears the temple to the ground and takes all the people out, except for a few that he leaves there as sort of a clemency. Right? He takes everybody out in the Babylonian captivity, the great exile. And Jeremiah is comparing the grief of this to the grief of Rachel when she was mourning Joseph and Benjamin. Remember, she thinks Joseph is dead, and then they send Benjamin in Joseph's place, and the brothers all come back, and they've kept Benjamin. It's all a big scandal. So there's the idea of Rachel weeping for her children. What's interesting about that is, of course, the Rachel. This grief, this incredible grief, concluded in Jeremiah 31 with the promise of a new covenant and an end of the exile. Jeremiah 31 gives us the hold this grief in our hands, this horrible grief of being exiled from God because of our sin. But out of that comes the new covenant, the law written on our hearts in a way it never was before, and new life. So we're meant to see in the death of the children and the salvation of Jesus out of this event, we're meant to see the beginning of the end of the exile. We're seeing that Jesus is not only the new Israel, or the fulfillment of Israel's promise. He is also the new Moses. Right? As Pharaoh murders the firstborn sons, or murders the sons of the Israelites, Moses is put in a boat and sent down the river, and he's saved by Pharaoh's daughter. We all know that story. We've all seen the Ten Commandments, I hope. John Nesta and the whole thing. But we see here that, of course, Jesus is, as promised in Deuteronomy 18, the greater Moses to come, the prophet greater than he, prophesied all the way back there, is now coming to the people. And the momentous events where evil attempted to destroy the covenant mediator, Moses, we should not be surprised to see the same kind of evil attempting to destroy the new covenant mediator in Christ. If we understand that evil, the heart of evil is Satan, of course, right? The same demonic agent. But it shouldn't be a surprise to us that evil one uses the same methods again and again and again and again and again. What should fill us with comfort and hope is that those methods always ultimately fail. Right? Pharaoh's thugs weren't able to kill Moses. Herod's thugs weren't able to kill Christ. Christ is going to die at his appointed time and place for the sins of the whole world. None of that can be stopped by evil kings. Just like our salvation cannot be stopped by evil kings. No matter how they rage, no matter how many people they kill, none of that is going to stop the plan of God. And that can really only be shown to us through this all happening. Always knowing that the people who are harmed by evil not only never gets the last word, right? Evil never can overturn the plans of God, but in his majestic glory, God can even redirect the plans of evil so that good comes from them. That is a truly powerful God, a God not to be trifled with. That our rebellion against him will be used against us to bring us closer to him. As a human race. That's a fascinating God. Why would you fight that God? How do you fight that God? You can't. It's futile. It's madness. Satan fights out of madness. He doesn't fight because he has a chance. There is no chance against that God. Mike, question?
I think it's fascinating, just as the Magi believed what they were hearing, or
Yeah.
Herod also believed.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
And
He is
it kind of made
exactly right.
him his equal.
He believed in the same way St. James say the devils in hell believe. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, St. James is that terrifying remark, but not terrifying. It's uplifting and the truth that it isn't just enough to believe Jesus is who he says he is, like in your head, like a mental assent. Right? The devils in hell know Jesus is God. They know all this, right? Remember the demon sees Jesus inside and says, get away from me. I know who you are. And Jesus says, shut up, don't tell everybody. Right? Right? Because it's not my time yet. Right? Yeah, they know, but knowing isn't the same thing as a lively faith. It isn't the same thing as being a new, regenerate soul prepared for the new heaven and new earth. Right? That isn't the same thing. Right? And it isn't a cryptic, we've been talking about this for weeks, going through the articles, right? Describing what a lively saving faith looks like. A lively saving faith, as James says, a faith without works is dead. Well, what does that mean? He's fighting against the idea that we can sort of, as long as I believe in my head the right things, the things I do don't matter, right? It's kind of like my body doesn't matter, the things I do with it doesn't matter. As long as I think the right things, that's all that matters, right? That's not really what belief means, right? Belief is about allegiance, right? It's not just that Christ is our Savior, He's our Lord, He's our King, right? And if you tell a king to go stuff it, I'm going to do what I want, then that's not a sign that you actually believe in Him or a sign that you have faith in Him. The ways in which we show faith is through our loving obedience to God. The same way Jesus shows His love to the Father, by loving obedience all the way to the cross. So there is no belief, real belief, without the fruits of righteousness coming out of us by the grace of God. Right? And all of that is grace all the way down and through. Right? So when Herod says, I'm going to go send out my murderers to go try to get this guy, it is a sign to us, it's like when the devil in Matthew is going to quote the Bible, right, to try to get Jesus to do bad things. Like having that, we can misuse all these things. We can misuse our understanding of the Bible is saying to hurt people, right, as Herod is doing here. That is not the same thing as being a faithful Christian. And people do this all the time. How many people say, if you give me $100, God will bless you? Right? That's the same thing as Herod's doing. Right? Using the Bible as a way to hurt people. Right? It's using it as a cudgel against people to hurt them. Happens all the time. Right? And it's evil and terrible. The devil does it. It comes from the devil. You're going to see in Matthew 4, he's literally going to do it. Right? He's going to quote from the Psalms, which is something. But the good news is, of course, is that the Bible is God's will. And the plan of salvation is God's plan. And God is stronger than all of these forces arrayed against us. Trust in His strength, even if while we're being murdered or assaulted or torn down by the devil's minions and his lackeys and idiots. That is all about the Christian life. What Matthew wants us to desperately know is that if you were watching this all happen, so you're at ground level, right? And you see the city children being murdered in the streets, this family fleeing to Egypt. If you were looking at that at ground level, would you say, the king has come? Hallelujah. Not necessarily. Now, if you knew these prophecies well, maybe you have that in the back of your mind, but that would not be an obvious thing to see. But it would be the right thing to see. It would be right to have faith in God, even as all that was going on. That's the reality actually happening, not the things, the lies that we think we understand. Right? The real power is in that child. Yes.
Well, on Palm Sunday, everybody's all cheering
Very
and
excited.
throwing their coats down and having the donkey walk on the coats, and so his feet shouldn't touch the earth. And,
Yeah.
And a week later, they're killing him.
Right. It's not a good scene.
Not a good scene.
No. It's not a good advertisement for humanity. Right? You're absolutely right. It's that there are no good guys in that whole story except for Jesus, and we are only good in our following of Him and the grace and He gives us out of His love. Right? There's a tragedy in all of that, but out of tragedy comes life. Out of tragedy comes glory. That is the way it always works. And it's the way it works in the real world, too. Everyone here is going to die, and that is going to be tragic and horrible. Right? Never is good when people die. It's not the circle of life. It's none of that nonsense. It is bad when people die. However, out of that tragedy comes glory. St. Paul says. Out of that comes resurrection glory. And that's not, there's nothing else. It's not like we can believe in something else, or our memories will live on, or people will get real sad at a funeral, or all the other things people talk about, like making things worth, like life worth living, none of that other stuff is going to be worth a damn. No one's going to remember you 100 years from now. Sorry, that's painful, but it's true. Maybe a picture someone will have of you and they'll think back fondly of it. But what I can guarantee is that you will rise in glory, or you will certainly rise, and you will be recognized by the Creator who made you. 100%. Right? And also, we have a destination as soon as we die. Right? We see in the throne room of God the people of God preparing to return to earth. We also know that people are in punishment as well. We know Lazarus looks out and sees the rich man suffering. Jesus wouldn't tell us that if it was just fanciful. It's a real thing that's happening. And so that's the reality we have to see. And it shouldn't be a surprise to us that the fallen world wants us to believe the lie more than the truth. How else would it operate? It was wounded and broken. It was like having a broken, I'm going to date myself, a broken VCR, right? It isn't going to just start working one day by accident. You have to fix it. Otherwise, you're never going to be able to see what's on the tapes, the reality that's there. It's always going to be a broken thing that doesn't work right. That's the fallen world because of sin, because of our bad stewardship of it. But God is making it better. God is renewing it through Christ and through His people. And He will come again in the second coming to make all things new and purge all evil and make a world in which there are no more broken VCRs. That's the way to think about it. No more broken VCRs. No more broken anything is the idea. Right? Nothing will be broken, including us, ever again. That's the real good news coming out, and this tough ending to this chapter. Woo, this doesn't look good. I'm glad some wise men showed up, but yikes. Hope that gold lasts. No, so much more is going on. So we'll end there today, right on as our end of thinking about Epiphany. But again, if we take something important away today, always remember that we see in the plans of God His love for the world. Right? And the idea that these pagan magi are given the grace to know that they are before their Lord and King is good news to Gentiles. Right? It's good news to the world. And so we should do our best to seek Him wherever he may be, wherever He leads us. Right? Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. God bless you all. Any questions on the Epiphany or anything?